Sure. Well, both of my parents came from Winnipeg, Canada, and my mom's mom was born in Gomel, Belarus, but she moved to Winnipeg when she was 2. And I think all of my other grandparents were born in Winnipeg as well. And before that, I know some of them on my dad's side came from Poland, and I know some of them were from Romania. I think that the name Israel was originally Israelovich, and that was Romanian or something, and it got, or Israelovici or something, and then it got shortened.
Do you know how they wound up in Winnipeg?
I don't know. We had a family tree that we were looking at that was like one very specific part of the family, and I think that they came like far before the war. They were in England at some point, and I guess maybe they had relatives in Winnipeg or something and ended up there, but I'm not really sure why. Why Winnipeg?
So what did your parents tell you about growing up in Winnipeg, or what stories did you hear?
A lot of stories. Winnipeg is kind of fascinating for me. So my dad is the oldest of 5 siblings, and his father was a lawyer and owned some laundromats, and I guess they had a big, they're a very close, big family, so it's, they tell a lot of stories about growing up, and my mom's dad was a traveling salesman, and then later became a life insurance salesman, and he was quite a character. One of my favorite stories of him, we have a recording of him telling it actually, is the story of how he sold a dead man a suit with 2 pair of pants, which was like, he worked in a pawn shop, and his son came in and needed a suit to dress his father up in for the funeral, and I guess in those days you had to sell a suit with 2 pair of pants, so he made it into this big deal that the son would have the other pair of pants, and he'd think of his father. I don't know. He was a character. And my grandmother stayed home with the kids. My mom is the youngest of 3 sisters.
Did you know your grandparents? Or
Yeah.
do you still know them?
Both of my grandmothers are still living in Winnipeg, and my grandfathers both passed away. My mom's mom when I was 10, and my dad's my dad's father when I was maybe 12. And I knew my dad's grandmothers too, actually. They passed away when I was a kid, but I sort of remember them.
So you have memories of going to Winnipeg as a child?
Yeah.
Can you describe it for someone who has never been there and knows nothing about it?
Yeah, it's very flat. It's very cold in the winter. It's beautiful in the summer, and I wrote a little thing about it once, and I said it looks like it was drawn on Etch-a-Sketch. All the streets are just very flat, and it's a big grid. And if you fly over it in the summer, it looks like a big quilt because there's lots of farmland. It's surrounded. Yeah, it's a nice place. I don't think I would want to live there because it's so isolated. And people say about Winnipeg that either you live there for life or you get out as soon as you can. But it's.
So what's the Jewish community like there? Both when your parents were young and now?
It's pretty vibrant, I think, especially when they were younger. I think that there was a pretty big Jewish and Yiddish-speaking community and older people, and I don't know. I guess my grandmother now lives in a retirement home, and there's a lot of Jews and Yiddish speakers and stuff, and I sort of get the sense that in this area, that sort of community is dying off, and it's getting more watered down or becoming more reformed. But I think at one point it was pretty large.
Were your parents raised in religious homes?
My My dad was sent to Talmud Torah when he was a kid, which I don't think he liked very much, and they didn't end up doing that with any of the other kids. Yeah, and I think that they celebrated the holidays and stuff, and it was, I think his parents maybe went to an Orthodox shul, or conservative or something, but it wasn't that religious. And same sort of thing with my mom. She said she remembers going to Orthodox shul with her grandparents, but I don't think they were, maybe they kept kosher, but it wasn't that big. They might not even have kept kosher. It wasn't a huge, yeah.
Can you identify any particular differences between the community there and communities you've lived in here?
I guess without having really lived there, not really. But, to me it feels like I have a very strong Yiddish connection there. And I don't know if that's actually because there's more like Yiddish stuff going on there, but I think it's mostly because my family lives there, and it feels to me like, such a cultural, I guess I sort of associate my connection with Yiddish and Jewishness with my grandmothers and my family, and, so to me personally it feels very important, Jewishly and otherwise. Yeah.
So your parents made their way to Newton, Massachusetts.
Yes.
How did that happen?
My dad went to med school. He went to, I guess, not med school actually, that was afterwards. He went to MIT for grad school, and they just sort of ended up staying in the area. I think they intended to go back to Canada at some point, but they didn't.
So what was it like growing up in Newton? Can you just describe the town?
Yeah, it's a very sheltered and privileged place, which meant, it was a very lovely place to grow up in. And as I got older, I sort of had more issues with it. But I mean, it's very beautiful. Newton, it's I think called the Garden City or something, and it's a nice, very safe place to grow up. And I like it. There's a big Jewish community there. And, so growing up in Newton, it was always like very normal to be Jewish, which, I sort of realized as I moved out of that situation that, not everybody's Jewish. It's not that normal, but, I've always felt very comfortable with it, I guess.
What kind of neighborhood did you live in?
Suburban, pretty. Yeah. Nothing too special, I guess.
Newton is almost famous for how Jewish it is. Can you describe what the texture of that Jewish community is? Like, I don't know, is it largely sort of Reform synagogue kind of Jewish? Is there an Orthodox community? Is there a mix? Are there tensions?
Yeah, I guess I grew up going to Reform synagogues, but there are a lot of Reform synagogues. There are also a lot of conservative ones, and I think there's a growing Orthodox community there. I grew up actually across from my elementary school, and next to that there was an Orthodox shul, and they were quite small. It was like in a house, but I remember one Shabbos, like some Orthodox Jew coming up to our house and knocking on our door and seeing if my dad would like be part of a minyan, which was sort of funny. Yeah, I didn't have any interactions really with the Orthodox community, and I don't really know like who they are, but they just expanded that synagogue, and it seems to be getting bigger. And sometimes you see people on Saturdays walking, with their kids with the big streimels and stuff. Yeah.
are the interactions between Jews and non-Jews? Is there a sense that Jews are the majority there? You're sort of an outsider if you're not Jewish, or?
No, but it's definitely like normal to be Jewish. I think it's maybe like 40%, or maybe it's less than that, but or maybe 40% of my high school or something. I had a lot of non-Jewish friends growing up too, but it's like they know a lot about sort of everyday aspects of Judaism, and it's like not weird for people to take off Jewish holidays at school, and it's a pretty relaxed place. I don't think anyone feels really out of place as far as I was aware of growing up. But
it's a nice sort of, seems like a functioning, diverse community in some ways.
Yeah.
That's good. Yeah. And who lived in your home growing up?
Me and my parents and my older brother, 4 years older than me. We had a turtle.
What did you say?
We had a turtle too.
And what was his name? Or her name?
Max.
Will you tell me a little bit about your relationships with those people?
Yes. My brother is 4 years older. His name is Saul, and I had a very, little sister following my big brother around relationship with him. We're very close. And my mom and dad, my mom's a reporter for the Boston Globe, and my dad is a radiologist. We're a happy little family.
You get along and...
Yeah. I realized more as I've grown older how much my family is very close, and that's very lucky. But yeah.
Would you describe it as a Jewish home?
Yeah. Not terribly religious. We never kept kosher. And, I don't really remember going to shul on a regular basis other than on the holidays. But we definitely did go on the holidays. And, I like cooking Jewish foods with my mom. That's sort of a thing. And, I don't feel like I was that aware of it being a Jewish home, I guess, growing up, but it was there, I think.
What foods do you like to cook with your mom?
I like to make gefilte fish on the holidays.
How do you
It's
make
fun.
gefilte fish?
Well, you sort of grind up the fish and like carrots and onions and all sorts of stuff and bake it in a loaf. That's how we do it. I hated it when I was a kid because I didn't like fish of any kind, but I've grown to like it over the years. It's a big thing at the holidays. You always have to like make each separate gefilte fish plate. So with like a slice and the lettuce and the tomatoes and carrot flowers.
You can make carrot flowers.
Sort of. Amateur carrot flowers.
Any other foods you liked?
Matzo balls, chicken soup. I make it on my own sometimes, but it's never quite as good as my mom's. And yeah, that was a thing with my grandmother too. Every time we went to Winnipeg, she would always have a pot of chicken soup on when we arrived. That was always, "Are you hungry?" It's the first question.
So, do you have specific traditions around the different holidays? Like you go to Winnipeg for a certain holiday, or you celebrate in different locations?
So we don't really go to Winnipeg for holidays, which is always, I always wish that we had more family around for the holidays. What we ended up doing was we have some family friends some of whom were actually originally from Winnipeg, so we sort of have a little Winnipeg community in this country. And we would usually be with them for Passover, Hanukkah, yeah.
Do you have fond memories of those holidays?
Yeah. I really liked Passover growing up. I sort of like the ritual around it, and I like just, doing the same thing every year with the same group of people and eating the same things. I don't know, there's something nice about it. And yeah, I guess that's probably my favorite Jewish holiday. I also like Rosh Hashanah.
Did your family acknowledge or celebrate Shabbos in any way?
I remember lighting candles when we were a kid, and that sort of fell off over the years, I guess, as we got older and were home less and our parents were working more and stuff. But yeah, I had friends who were much more religious about keeping Shabbat, and I remember that they would always have to be home Friday night, and they would have that time with their family, which was nice, but didn't really happen with us. And yeah.
What languages did you hear growing up? I mean, you mentioned that you associate Winnipeg with Yiddish, and was that something you heard around you?
Not that much. I mean, words and phrases, definitely. But it was sort of more of like an intonation, I guess. My Baba sort of like, I remember her saying something once like, I wouldn't get him to sell my little toenail or something. That struck me as such a Yiddish phrase, even, it was in English, but it's just a certain way of thinking or talking. It's like a cultural thing, I guess. But yeah, I mean, mostly English. And then, it sort of struck me at some point that my mom would use Yiddish phrases and stuff, and my grandmother would use even more Yiddish phrases, and I didn't really use them every day, which was sort of sad. And I wanted to be able to do that in an unthinking way.
So you sort of went, it was your own decision to go out and try to learn Yiddish.
Yeah, well, yeah, yes and no. I sang in a Yiddish chorus at the Workmen circle with my mom, starting when I was 8, and that was, I think I sort of ended up doing that because my mom was doing it, and I didn't really know anything about it or get it. I liked it, but it was I just ended up there, and then so that was sort of an accident, and by that accident I ended up getting really interested in Yiddish, and then decided to study it.
So your mom obviously had some draw to it also.
Yeah, I think so. I think she studied Yiddish at some point during college.
I should have warned you I was going to ask you this, but do you want to sing a Yiddish song? Since you were in the chorus for 10 years, you must know.
Maybe. I'll think of it.
What kinds of songs did you sing?
Well, one of the things about the Workmen Circle is that it's, a very activist sort of group of people. So we sang a lot of labor songs, and when I started out, I remember singing sort of a broad range of things. We'd sing lullabies and older songs and songs from the Holocaust and stuff, and then also these labor songs. And as the years went by, it seemed to sort of shift more and more towards social justice and more songs in English and stuff, which I didn't really like. But yeah, the one big one was the youth hymn, which I think was a ghetto song that they would have all of the kids in the chorus sing the verses, and then the whole chorus would chime in. It was kind of a big deal. I don't know. I don't know if I can sing it on camera.
Did you guys perform in a lot of places?
Yeah. And we did some pretty cool performance. I remember doing one concert with Robbie O'Connell, who was an Irish folk singer, and that was really cool. I like those sort of fusion ones, and we did one with the New England Spiritual Ensemble too, which was really nice and interesting. Yeah.
Do you still sing at all these days?
I sang in high school, and I sang in a chorus in college as well, but not this year. Maybe in the future.
What kind of chorus in college?
It was like a sort of classical choral music group. We did a lot of requiems and masses and stuff in church. That's always a funny thing, singing about Jesus. But I like the music.
You have multicultural singing experience.
Yes.
Okay, well, we can come back if you feel comfortable.
Okay.
So you said your family went to a Reform synagogue.
Mm-hmm.
Can you describe it a little bit?
Yeah. It's called Temple Beth Avodah, and I went to Hebrew school there growing up, which I didn't really love. Maybe I just was too young to pay attention, but I didn't really like reading in Hebrew, or I didn't really get learning Hebrew, and I didn't really pay that much attention to the history that they taught us. But it's Hebrew school. I guess a lot of people have that experience. But I really liked my rabbi. I guess there was one rabbi who retired when I was maybe 10 or something, and then a new rabbi who came in, and I liked both of them. And we had a cantor while I was growing up, who I really, really loved. She was, I think, trained as an opera singer, and she just had this beautiful, very, glowing voice. And I mean, she would talk about the importance of music and how people would say that when she sang, there was an aura around her, and you could sort of see that. And I really liked that. And when she left at some point after my Bat Mitzvah, and I sort of felt less connected to the synagogue after that. We had new cantors who were more in the guitar strumming, bongo drum beating camp, which is not, really, I think that a lot of what I connect to in Jewish religious service is the music, and, melodies, and it's sort of, when Rivka, the previous cantor, was there, it felt there was sort of sacred space, and after that it was more I don't know, felt a little too watered down.
It's interesting that while they're probably trying to make it more fun or easier for young people to connect, in some ways, for you, it was easier to connect with what the traditional.
Yeah. It felt I'm not that religious a person, but what I like about the religion is the tradition and the, I guess it felt sort of watered down, and it's either kind of all or nothing,
And in Hebrew school, were you learning to actually speak Hebrew conversationally, or was it just the traditional, you learn to read it and you can't really,
pretty
really
much
know what you're saying?
Yeah, I mean, I think I remember learning animal words and that sort of thing, but we didn't really learn to speak it. And yeah, I don't really, maybe, yeah, I remember learning some Hebrew grammar and not really, like, getting it, or, like, not really understanding what they were trying to teach. And yeah, I was a slow reader. I didn't practice at home, and yeah.
And what was your bat mitzvah like?
Big, lots of family. My whole family came in from Winnipeg, and all of our extended family, and, you know, I think that was really nice. I remember my grandmother baked like 12 cheesecakes and flew them in from Winnipeg, which is sort of how our family operates. And we had the Yiddish chorus sing at the service, which was really nice. I think maybe it would have been more meaningful to me if I had been older. I guess that's, you know, you're 13 when you have your bat mitzvah, but, you know, it meant something, but it wasn't like a huge deal. But I think it was really nice for my family, and I really liked having everybody there.
I think I'm gonna finish this portion by just asking you what you think your parents have tried to pass on to you in terms of values, both Jewish and not Jewish. And
that's a good question. It's funny because I've asked it a lot of times, but I haven't really thought about it in my own life. Tradition, I guess, the importance of tradition. Which is funny because we're not really that like traditional a family, but you know, I think that Jewish culture and, you know, things like cooking and, you know, Jewish sort of reading and that sort of thing feels important. And thinking for yourself, doing the right thing, you know.
the biggies.
The biggies.
You mentioned reading. Do you feel like, in addition to food and music, were there other Jewish cultural things that were important in your family, whether literature or film or?
We definitely had a lot of Jewish books around in our house, and I think a lot of that came from my mum. You know, I know that I think she sort of went through the whole sort of a phase of like what I am studying now and stuff, and what I'm interested in now. And I remember seeing a lot of Bashevis Singer and, you know, Boston Jewish community history sort of stuff on our shelves, and you know, it was always there. And we have like the whole Encyclopedia Judaica. I don't know where that came from. Yeah, I mean, it was not something that I was consciously aware of, like, engaging with necessarily when I was a kid, but, like, I remember, like, making dinner and listening to Chava Albertstein and Mandy Patinkin and, you know, stuff that now, having studied some Yiddish, it seems like, you know, we really were scratching the surface of what there is, but it was an important connection.
How do you think your parents feel about what you have, you know, been studying and the choices you've made to focus on this so far?
I think they're happy. I mean, I know, you know, my mom is interested in it, and I think she connects, she sort of has remembered why, it's sort of something that she left behind, and then sort of has remembered why she liked it when I started studying it. And my dad, he doesn't talk about being Jewish very much, but he's always seemed to be very happy when I engage with it, and I think he thinks it's nice or something. Yeah.
So let me ask you about your university experience. How did you decide to go to McGill?
Funny story. I think I wasn't really ready to think about college when I was finishing high school. I didn't really it was kind of, you finish high school, you go to college. That's, in Newton anyway, from a fortunate background. And the Newton public schools are very much focused on getting people into college and stuff. So it was kind of mindless. And I applied to a bunch of places that had Yiddish programs. I sort of fixed on the idea that, I didn't know what I wanted to study, but I wanted to take a Yiddish class. And I wanted to go to Canada, because I sort of, growing up in America, I didn't feel that American, even though, I don't really have a right to call myself Canadian. I wanted to try living in Canada, and basically my brother went to school at the University of Toronto. Being a person who has followed him around for much of my life, I was kind of like, well, basically I want to do exactly what my brother did, but not. And so I chose a big school in Canada in a city that wasn't the one he went to, more or less.
So it sounds like at that age, when you were graduating high school, you did know quite a lot. I mean, you knew that you wanted to connect with your roots in various ways, taking Yiddish and going to Canada and being near your brother. And
Yeah, I think, it's interesting that you say that, because I think that at that age I was looking more for, who I was than looking to study a particular thing. And, I ended up getting to look into some of that stuff by moving to Canada and studying Yiddish. And I'm glad I ended up there, but a lot of it was sort of happy accidents.
So what was it like there at McGill in general?
Very different. Montreal is a really interesting city to live in, because there's the whole French environment, and it's part of Canada, and that's definitely clear in a lot of ways, but it's also very much its own place. And so that was really interesting. I have, my mom's cousin lives in Montreal, and I got to spend a lot of time with her, which is really nice. And she sort of introduced me to a lot of the city. And yeah, it opened me up in a lot of ways that I hadn't expected. And, I was kind of miserable there my first year or two, but then I really, really liked living there.
Was it, it sounds kind of, I want to say scary to go to this big city and be an international person there. And from what I could see of McGill, it seems like perhaps you're not as coddled as you are in some of the American dorms where you have everyone. So
yeah, McGill, that's very much a part of it, is that you have to do things on your own. You have to be independent, and that was hard for me at first. I don't think I ever saw my advisor, which I talk to people from American schools, and they're like, oh, I saw my advisor every other week. And it's like, it's such a different thing. You really figure it out on your own, which is really hard, but it's also helpful in preparing for life, I think, in some ways, and housing you are guaranteed for your first year. And other than that, I lived off campus for 3 years. So I had to learn to cook and, buy toilet paper and all that fun stuff, but I really enjoyed that after a while, and it was really interesting to engage with other people who were doing that. It was a big shift to make.
Did you engage with the Jewish community at McGill at all, or?
Not that much. My first year, I went a couple times to the Reform club thing, and I don't know. They were very small, and I think the guy who ran it graduated after that year, and it sort of dissolved. I wasn't really involved with that, and I didn't really go to Hillel, or there's a place called Ghetto Shul, which is like, it's sort of Orthodox, but it's very open, and I actually never went there until my last semester. I went there for Purim or something, and it was actually really interesting. I sort of wished I'd tried it sooner, but I was very timid when I started, and I didn't really feel comfortable just going in there. I felt like I engaged in a different way by studying Yiddish, and my Yiddish professor was really nice and open, and so I felt like I was sort of engaging with that. And I didn't really feel like I needed to have much more of a religious life. I went to a shul on the holidays maybe, and it was a little weird without my family. And, yeah.
So was that where you started really studying Yiddish?
Yeah. I took a Yiddish class once before when I was like 16 at the Workmen circle, and it was kind of, it was like once every couple weeks, and it was me and a bunch of older people, and I didn't learn that much. It was, it was sort of funny, but it was like, okay, this is kind of weird that I'm here. But I started studying it more seriously in college, and I took it all throughout, from my first semester to my last.
Which was your professor?
Anna Gonshore. And she is a native Yiddish speaker and really wonderful. And it was a very small class. My first 3 years, there was only one other student in my class, and my last year it was just me. So that was an interesting way of learning too. McGill is such a huge, huge university, and so it was funny to have this experience of having just such a tiny, tight-knit little department.
How proficient did you become?
Not fluent. I can understand better than I speak, but I can understand pretty well. And I'm a slow reader, but I can read. And, yeah.
Do you have any favorite Yiddish writers?
Well, the ones that I studied in most depth were the poet Rachel Cohen, who I love. She writes a lot about sort of nature and sexual awakening, I guess, and it's really, really beautiful. And then later she writes a lot about the Holocaust and losing her whole family, which is, very heavy, but I love her earlier stuff. And Avram Sutzkever, who is also incredible. And I sort of feel like I have enough understanding that I can really enjoy how beautiful it is, but not enough to really feel like I'm getting everything. I feel like there's a lot more going on there than I'm getting.
So do you read, when you read Yiddish literature, do you read it in Yiddish and sort of consult the translation kind of thing? Or?
Well, there isn't much in translation. So, in some ways I think that's a good thing. Because, the few things I read with the translation, it can be kind of a crutch. But, yeah, I would read it, I would read it once and underline everything I didn't know, which could be quite a lot, and then I'd look up all the words and try and read it again. So it can be tedious. Like, that's the thing I feel that holds me back from reading more, is that I'm such a slow reader and it takes such a long time to look up all the words that it's like, it feels like a chore to get through it, but it's really nice to read when I manage to do that.
So Rachel Korn, has she been translated much at all?
I don't think so, no.
So you've just read her in the original?
Yeah.
I wish I had asked you to bring a poem. Do you know any in your head?
Not by heart. No. I know which one I would read, though, if I had it with me.
What's it called?
It's called A Brief, a letter. And it talks about how she's writing a letter to her beloved about what a beautiful day it is and how she wants to take it, and it's like a fruit. She wants to pluck it and put it in an envelope and send it to him, but he wouldn't understand. He'd say the envelope was empty. And it's, I don't know, it's beautiful. I don't know. Good poem.
I want to get you to
speak some Yiddish.
Yeah, I don't know how to do that.
Yeah. Oh, I'd read it if I had it.
That was my failure.
That's okay.
So when did you come to the Steiner Summer Program?
I came in 2009, so halfway through college, I guess. So that was really nice. It was, I liked studying Yiddish a lot, but it's different to study it with one other person or two other people. And the thing I really, really liked about being here was that, there were 17 other people who were very excited about Yiddish. And, I studied Spanish as well up to that point, and it's such a different experience because you have people you can learn with. I had language exchange partners that I was able to find, and you read with the whole class, and you can, anywhere you go, you can find somebody to speak Spanish with. But Yiddish, not so much. And it's really sort of a shame. And so, being here was so nice because, we didn't speak Yiddish all the time, but it was nice to be able to just, engage with this stuff and have the people around you understand what you're talking about. And I really liked that.
Was that your first time here at the Yiddish Book Center?
I think I'd visited it once before, but it was my first time really being here.
And who were your teachers that summer?
Hanan was my main teacher, language teacher. He was wonderful, and Yuri was here as well, and he sort of helped me with my independent project, which was an oral history project, and then we had a bunch of people rotating and doing lectures, which was nice. I think one of my favorite lectures was a cooking class, actually, with Eve Joknowitz, and we made bagels and blintzes, and she taught us Yiddish food words. That was really fun.
At this point, you've graduated college, you've been out 1 year. How do you feel like Yiddish language and Yiddishkeit fit into your sense of Jewishness and Jewish identity?
Pretty integrally. I sort of feel like, having started to study Yiddish, I realized how much comes from Yiddish and, from, Yiddish is just part of, the voice of that whole culture. And, I feel like when I started studying Yiddish, I was just interested in the language. And then I also started taking history and literature classes, and I really felt like I realized that you can't study the language and understand it without having a context. And it was like, wow, there's so much about Jewish life that I don't know. In Hebrew school, they teach you biblical history, biblical times, and then they sort of skip to the Holocaust and Israel. And I didn't connect to that. The Holocaust is very sad and, awful, and it's an important history to learn. But I didn't have family personally that I'm aware of that was affected by it. And I feel like, how do you understand the importance of Israel without having a context for this whole, thousands of years of history? So I never really connected to Israel either. And I'm not that religious a person, and, Hebrew, in praying in Hebrew, it's kind of like, okay, personally. And so starting to study Yiddish was like, wow, I sort of understand why certain things are funny. You understand where Jewish names come from, and just where foods come from, and where this whole cultural thing comes from. And I felt like, I wasn't something is missing in my life and Yiddish is the answer, but it's I definitely feel like I have a much richer knowledge of being Jewish now that I've studied Yiddish, and I want to keep expanding that.
And you have in your year here as a fellow. Will you talk a little bit about what you've worked on while you've been a Yiddish Book Center Fellow?
Yeah, I guess my main project has been the translation project. Sort of figuring out how to get more Yiddish literature translated into English, which is, when I started here, I hadn't really thought very much about it, and having thought about it and worked on it a bit over the year, it sort of became much closer to my heart. I think it's really, really important that people are able to access this stuff, because, I speak to my friends from home, who went through the same Hebrew school system, and I have a friend who's now becoming a Hebrew teacher or Hebrew school teacher, and they don't know any of this stuff. They know the same they know the Hebrew stuff, and they know more about religion probably than I do, which is probably an important thing for me to learn at some point. But they don't know this history of Eastern European Jewish life, and it feels like that's where all the flavor comes from to me. And so I feel like if maybe the literature is accessible, maybe people could engage with it more.
So what do you think has been most meaningful that you'll take away from your time here? Not that it's over yet.
I guess the importance of educating people and the possibility of doing something about it. Because, it feels like such a monumental task, but if you think about it, I guess the book center has been doing monumental tasks and doing them well, so, maybe maybe it's possible to change the way things are.
I want to ask you, going backwards slightly chronologically, about your trip to Eastern Europe. That was before you came to the fellowship?
Yeah, that was last summer.
So what made you decide to go on that trip?
Well, I guess after studying about it for a while, I'd never seen that part of the world, and I felt like I really wanted to explore and see some of the places I've been hearing about. And I went with my friend from France, and it was really fascinating. I mean, we didn't do any sort of organized trip, really. We planned our trip, but it wasn't, a tour group or anything. And so I feel like we got maybe a different perspective on it than we would have if we'd done a tour, which is a good and a bad thing. There's only so much you can learn from a guidebook, but it was really cool to be exploring. And I don't know, one of the most interesting things to me was just like when we spent a week in France before we left, and we went to Le Marais, which is the Jewish quarter of Paris, and we went to the museum there, and it was beautiful. It was very well curated. It was, a nice museum, and it had like old manuscripts. It had, traditional garb and like Torah crowns and that sort of thing, all kinds of different stuff, and it was, very much what you expect from a museum. And then the first place we went in Eastern Europe was Odessa in Ukraine, and we went to the Jewish Museum there, and it was so different. It was like a tiny little place. It was like in an apartment, a couple of rooms, and there was one staff member who unlocked the door to let us in and turned on the lights, and it was like objects from people's homes, not behind glass, just like, like spoons from the kitchen, like furniture, like records, and, some of it was Jewish related and some of it was just like people's stuff. And it was like, wow. I mean, it was so much more affecting and, so interesting and so sad at the same time. And like, I don't really know the story behind how that stuff got there, but it was like very powerful in an odd way. And, it was also interesting as we traveled the way things changed. I mean, we started pretty far east. We started in Odessa and sort of made our way west across Ukraine, up Poland into Lithuania, and then down and ended up in Prague. And in Ukraine and in Lithuania, there was really no effort to preserve stuff for the most part. Like, we went to a cemetery. I think this was maybe in Vilnius. I could be wrong about that. And we had to, like, you know, it said in our guidebook, like, it's like a little bit wildernessy or something, you know, it's, you go to this address, and it's sort of overgrown or something. So I expected, like, kind of a field or something with overgrown stones. And we went to this, like, address, and there was a field, and it was completely bare, and there was, like, one stone. And we're like, is this the right place? Like, what else? You know, there's nothing else around here, really. So that was very strange. And then we noticed that there was, like, a forest behind it. And we ended up going in there, and that was the graveyard. You could see, like, trees, like, growing up over the stones. And it was, like, completely overrun, completely neglected. Like, trash and bottles, and it was like, I can't believe this is here. Like, it was kind of astounding. There was no path or anything. It was, like, completely bushwhacking. And so that was, like, I don't know, it was sort of stunning. And as we went to more Western places, we ended up in Prague, where things are really well preserved. And you have the old Jewish cemetery, you have, like, different museums in the synagogues. But it's almost like a tourist attraction. And you have buses that go to, like, take you around the Jewish quarter. And so in some ways it's nicer, and in some ways it feels less real. And the one thing that I really remember striking me from Prague was that they had these sort of, like, gift carts outside of the museums and stuff, and one of the things they had were these little magnets of Jews, and they were so stereotypical. They had big noses, they had money, and it's like, are you serious? Like, how, like, you have this museum here, you're talking about the Holocaust and stereotypes that were perpetrated and, like, the whole Jewish community being wiped out, and then you go outside and there's this gift shop with, like, a little Jew holding money. Like, how something does not compute. Like, you know, I don't know if they saw it that way, I don't know if they understood that, but it made me so angry. And, like, so in a way I preferred Eastern, like, Ukraine, where, you know, there wasn't really a pretense.
It sounds like in that eastern part of the trip, you were sort of creating your own, I mean, you were really exploring to find the Jewish history rather than this, like, prepackaged, you know, which is kind of fascinating.
Yeah, and there was really nothing, you know, which was its own blow. I mean, you know, we would sometimes, I remember spending hours, like, walking around in the rain trying to find the synagogue, and we just couldn't find it in the end. I had to go back, and, like, you had to really look, like, really, really hard, and sometimes there was nothing, or there wasn't much, you know, but I found, like, one Yiddish speaker, which was cool.
Where was that?
I think that was also in Vilnius. But yeah, I mean, it really hit home in a way that it never had before, that, like, this stuff is gone. And I think for me that happened a lot more powerfully in the East, where so much was destroyed, rather than in the West, where it became this sort of, like, gaudy experience.
Is your friend from France Jewish?
She's not.
She wanted to go on this
Yeah, she's
tour with you.
very open. And she actually took a Yiddish film course with me at school, and got interested in some of this stuff. She's a good person to travel with in that way.
Great. Well, I'm going to ask you a few more questions to wrap up, but before I do that, are there any topics I haven't covered that you want to cover?
Not that I can think of. Yeah.
Well, if you think of anything,
Okay.
just pipe up. Well, first of all, what's next for you after the fellowship?
I'm going to be studying children's book illustration, Rhode Island School of Design, and I'm not really sure beyond that. I mean, I definitely want to be doing art, but I also want to see if there's a way I can incorporate Yiddish into what I do. I was not cut out for an academic, I think. But, you know, I like seeing how people are creative with Yiddish now. And I'd like to be part of that, or at least, you know, improve my spoken Yiddish. I'm hoping maybe I'll do the Vilnius Yiddish program at some point, because I'd like to both study more Yiddish and get to see Vilnius in more of a programmatic way, and, you know, have people tell me about it rather than just try and figure it out myself.
Do you think that your Jewish identity has evolved over time, and if so, how so?
Yes and no. I don't think that I've really changed the way I think about religion, I guess. But I feel like Jewish identity is much more important to me. And I mean, Yiddish education is much more important to me. And I want to, I don't know, I don't really want to teach Yiddish, but I want people to learn Yiddish, or at least learn some of the history and engage with those ideas. I mean, I think I think more about what it means to be Jewish since studying Yiddish, and yeah.
Do you have a favorite Yiddish word?
Probably prachtig, which means like superb or beautiful. It's something my Yiddish professor would always say, like, you know, if we read a Yiddish poem or something, like, das ist prachtig. It's like, I don't know, it's just like a little kernel of beauty. I like that word.
Last opportunity to sing a song. Just a few bars.
Okay. Let's see. I'll sing. What will I sing? Can I remember the words? That's the question. I'll sing the beginning of Jugendhymn, and I don't know if I remember the words. That might be okay. Unser Lied ist voll mit Treuer, trist ist unser Muntergang. Gott der Sonne wacht beim Teuer. I don't remember that. Blah, 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 blah. I don't know. That's the youth hymn that we would always sing, yeah.
That's beautiful.
It's nice, yeah. It's very cheerful, you know, and I don't know. It's full of life. And I like that because it's a ghetto song. It's talking about, you know, how the enemy is like standing at the door, but everyone is young who wants to be, and will be full of good cheer and go forward.
That's awesome. Well, thank you.
Thank you.